And so that would have done is it would have made like a national internets where every time you connect to another country, like you're going through a narrow funnel, right? And that makes it very easy to have like a national firewall, right? And so, I mean, it was absolutely an effort to censor the internet and make it easier for authoritarian regimes to censor the internet. And so that's exactly the scenario that like people were warning about. That's exactly what played out. We brought so much attention to it, and ultimately that scrutiny, I think what it led to was the treaty didn't get the treaty was ultimately like 55 countries refused to sign the treaty, including the U.S. and Europe and like sort of all the world's liberal democracies.
Welcome to episode 35 of People Are the Answer. I truly believe that people are the only answer to the world's many problems. I'm Jeffrey M. Zucker, a serial entrepreneur, here to learn how innovators are creating outsized, transformational social impact. Today's episode features Eli Dourado, an economist and regulatory hacker working to dramatically increase the pace of innovation and economic growth, especially in hard tech and aerospace. He currently serves as a senior research fellow at the Center for Growth and Opportunity at Utah State. Eli and I discuss his life and career journey and his massive efforts and impact in internet, energy, and aerospace policies, among other sectors. Here's Eli Dourado on People Are the Answer. Eli, thanks so much for joining me on People Are the Answer.
So glad to be here, Jeff.
It's my honor, and it'd be great if you could just start off by telling us who you are, where you're based, and what your current role is.
Sure. So my name is Eli Dourado. I live in the Washington, D.C. area, and I work for an organization that's based at Utah State called the Center for Growth and Opportunity. And so I'm a senior research fellow with them. And, basically it's at the CGO, I work on sort of figuring out how to get faster economic growth, particularly like faster in industrial progress and faster total factor productivity growth. And that's it. So basically I read and write and study and figure out how to make things go faster.
Love that. And in general, what would you say motivates you, excuse me?
Yeah, so I'm an economist by training, so I really like am motivated by faster economic growth. I remember being like a young kid and working out like the exponential math of like how rich we would all be in the future. Based on like sort of like what GDP per capita was today and like how fast it was going to grow, and like if it kept going at this rate, like what it would be like when I was an adult. And unfortunately, like we had this slowdown that began in I guess it began in the early to mid 1970s. But so like if you're extrapolating from like the 1950s and forward, like you're going to be disappointed, and so I was, and that motivates me. I want to get back to that sort of like higher growth that we had from like the mid 1940s to the mid 1970s.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective, and certainly would love to see us get back on that path. And you talked about like thinking about these concepts as you were a kid. Where did you grow up, and what was it like there?
So I grew up a bunch of different places. So lived overseas until I was about 9 years old. So I was born in Brazil. My dad is Brazilian and my mom is American, but they were living in Brazil at the time that I was born. And then when I was 4, my family moved to Greece. So I lived outside of Athens for about a year and a half. Did my kindergarten year there, and then lived in Portugal for a few years, like 3.5 years, and then moved to the States, to New Jersey when I was 9 years old. So just kind of moved around all over the place for a while before settling down in Jersey, and sort of like did my sort of middle school and high school there.
Nice. It sounds like that was an interesting journey, and I'm curious. One, when did sort of economics start to play a role in your mindset, and two, like how did you feel as a kid, if you can recall, hopping around like that?
I was always, yeah, I don't think I even like really knew the word economics as a kid, but like I was always interested in like sort of economicsy kinds of things, like looking at um, you know, having I think having had the experience of living in a bunch of countries when I was young, like made me like have an appreciation for like, oh, some countries are rich and some countries are poor, right? And like, what is the difference there? And like, what is the statistic that tells you that, right? And so I was interested in things like per capita GDP and even like stuff like how stock markets worked and things like that. Like from as young as I can really remember, like that was always interesting to me. I don't think I really like knew what economics was or was really interested in that at all. I took my first economics class in high school, and it was AP macroeconomics, which is basically taught as like very, very extremely like old fashioned Keynesian macroeconomics. And so like stuff that like I don't really think is exactly right at all. But like so I thought that at the time I felt like, well, this doesn't really make sense. But at the same time, it made a lot more sense to me than it did to my classmates. So that was probably like a first sign um, that that maybe this was the right field for me. And then yeah, in college when I finally took micro, it was just like, oh, this is like completely natural to me. It's just the way my brain is wired, is to think in those ways. And so so that was the first part of your question. What was the second part?
I mean, I think you covered what I was
Okay.
looking for there. Kind of when economics came into play when you moved to the U.S. and
Yeah,
when you did move to the U.S. at age 9, was that a difficult transition?
it was. Yeah, I think living in sort of a bunch of different countries and in the expat community, like so you're with a lot of people who are coming and going, right? It's very transient, dynamic. Everyone's like kind of always happy to make friends and stuff like that. And then you're dealing with not just the Americans, but you're dealing with the Brits and the other Europeans or a bunch of different nationalities, all the people who aren't from that country, right? Kind of like congregate a little bit, and so it's very it is very cosmopolitan in a way, right? Like just being part of, like, even if you're not like embedded in like the local community, like the expat community is very cosmopolitan and all different kinds of cultures and stuff. And so like yeah, like I think in like moving to the States, I think a lot of the other kids like hadn't really had that experience, right? Like they didn't for maybe a little bit more insular, I guess, in terms of people who had just basically like lived in the same county their whole life, or multiple generations even. And I think that there's something to be said for like throwing down roots and there's value there, but I think that there's also value in sort of the more nomadic or expat-y kind of lifestyle too. So anyway, so it was like a little bit of a culture shock for me. Um, having gone to like American schools, from the time I was in kindergarten, and so educated basically in American curriculum, spoke English fluently, like all that stuff. Like I felt like very, very like American and normal. It wasn't like that wasn't the big change, but it was like it still was very different.
Yeah, I'm sure that was, took some getting used to, but obviously it's been a while now, and I
Yeah,
saw that you ended up at Furman in my original home state of South Carolina. How did you
yeah.
end up there?
Well, I think I don't know. I was just like, well, I've been in New Jersey now for 9 years. As a senior in high school, and I was like, oh, let's get out of Jersey. Let's go somewhere different. And so kind of the South. I really was kind of interested in the South, the warmer weather, and liberal arts kind of education, and and Furman has a beautiful campus. Like, the day I visited, I think there were girls out playing beach volleyball or something by the lake, and I was like, oh yeah, I could live here for 4 years. That'd be all right. So it was funny. If it had been rainy that day that I visited, I don't know, it might not have been the same. But kind of funny random things happen that
Yeah.
drive your path, right?
And how was the experience?
Oh, it was great. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. A lot of smart people. Um, I was really into like uh, sort of poli sci when I started. There's a great poli sci
Right.
department at Furman, so I did a poli sci major and kind of also did an econ major once I finally like discovered, oh, I really like this econ stuff. So so yeah, I mean, it's just couldn't have asked for a better college experience, I think.
Was it that sort of poli sci foundation that drove you to initially get into politics when you first got out of college?
So I'd done an internship through Furman over the summer between my like sophomore and junior years, and so did an internship in DC, a political
Okay.
internship, and then um, was I was just kind of like, well, DC is where all the power is and where all the interesting stuff is happening. So I wanted to be there, and so yeah, first job out of college, I got a job on Capitol Hill, like working in a member's office. So yeah, it just sort of felt like I yeah wanted to be part of like that world.
And it appears as if you decided that wasn't your true calling and passion. And what was that? How did that occur? And what led you to move on?
Well, so my college sweetheart was in law school a couple hours away at UVA, and so we were kind of doing the long distance thing, and I was just like, this kind of sucks. Like the long distance thing is like not that fun. Um, so I decided to move down there and get married and stuff, and so we did that, and so I spent like a year working just at UVA, like at the medical school. And before, like, then when she graduated from law school, then we moved back up to DC, and that was I've been here ever since.
Very nice. Glad to hear that that's gone well. And so,
Yeah.
what was your first economist job after that?
Well, yeah. So when we moved up, I just sort of started when I was thinking about what to do. I kind of thought I want to do something more economicsy than political these days. So I one of the jobs I applied for was a Bureau of Economic Analysis job. So it was kind of great. It was a job that was where they hired based on just like standardized test scores. So like you didn't need like fancy application or any sort of like connection or in or anything like that. So took tests and did well and got hired on and so yeah, I mean it was not that challenging of a job at the time, but one of the great things was that they paid for like continuing education and stuff, and so kind of around about a year in, I was like, well, yeah, I probably want to go get like a PhD in this stuff. So made sure I had all the prereqs and stuff, and then started applying um, to to the graduate program at GMU.
Yeah, and then it seems like that became a pretty big part of your life. Can you talk about how you ended up at George Mason and just you were there, I think, between your degree and working for what 10 years?
Well, I was yeah, so yeah, I took me a long time to do my PhD, but I was worked at Mercatus also at the same time
Right.
for
So
part of
that's
the
yeah.
time.
So I was trying to
So
include
yeah,
that.
yeah. So basically, so I had been reading like online all the GMU bloggers, econ bloggers, right? There's like this wonderful community of GMU econ bloggers, and kind of for the past, I would say the previous like several years, I had been reading these guys and thought they were just like the coolest people. And so when I was at BEA, I initially was thinking, oh, I'll go do my PhD like kind of part time while I'm at BEA. So I applied for that, but I also ticked the full time box, and so by ticking the full time box as on the application, like that gave them a chance to say, okay, well, we'll give you some funding to come, and so they did, and so I said, see you later, BEA. I'm going full time. I got funding to go do it, and so yeah, so in retrospect, I'm not sure like it was 100% the best decision, because I think like PhD is really training for academia, like 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 real academia, like publishing in sort of top journals and tenure track and all that stuff. And in retrospect, I wasn't really interested in that. Like I just wanted to like do econ stuff and think big thoughts and so on. So yeah, so like I did really well in like the coursework phase and sort of prelims and qualifying exams and all that stuff. And that's not the stuff that really matters from a academic purpose. It's really like, how's your research coming along? And so when I got to like the dissertation phase, like for me it was a struggle, and it wasn't exactly um, you know uh, wasn't really like a good fit. And I would get to the point where like, do I really want to be doing this kind of research the rest of my life? And I think the answer was no. And so I struggled like for like a year or two with that, and then really figured out like, oh, this I had a chance to do some stuff with the Mercatus Center, and then was eventually brought on full time, and like that was kind of a better fit for like my brain and the way and kind of the work I wanted to do. So yeah, so I got hired on at the Mercatus Center like in a full time role, like even though I wasn't done with my degree, and then just sort of like did the finally there came a point where like I had to finish my degree, but it was there's a lot in between there.
Got it. Understood. Well, I'm glad you
Yeah.
found that fit at Mercatus Center. So you spent around 5 years there.
Yeah, so I started in the tech policy program there, and sort of was brought on and spent the first couple of years doing basically like internet policy stuff. So like cybersecurity, internet governance. We did some cryptocurrency, and then in a couple of years after I joined, I basically my boss left to go do something cryptocurrency related, and so I stayed behind and took over the program. And then kind of like when I was taking over the program, I kind of had a chance to like rethink things and how I wanted to do. And kind of I read around that time I read Peter Thiel's 0 to 1, and that was like really influential on my thinking at the time. And I decided, hey, like forget this like internet policy stuff. Let's focus on like real world technologies. And so my research then like kind of shifted to stuff like drones and supersonics. So like real world physical stuff that's like more heavily regulated, and so that was so, so that was like my last, like I would say like 3 years at Mercatus was more
Got
focused
it.
on that harder technology stuff.
I think both are super interesting. Obviously, the tech policy has tremendous impact on our current society as well. And then, yeah, the things sort of physical things that you're getting into, tangible things, certainly all of these things will have a long-term impact on our future. While you were there, did you see a lot of your efforts affecting the real world, or was it, longer term efforts?
I think we had some real world impact for sure. So one of the first things I worked on when I was there was there there was a UN meeting that was going to happen. Uh, um, and there's a UN agency that regulates telecom called the ITU, International Telecommunication Union, and they were going to have a treaty conference basically to update the international telecommunication regulations, and which is like what governs like sort of like the phone system, international phone system, like who like how does it work, like if what is the default rule for like if countries like if you're calling Zambia or something like that, like how much does it cost, and like who pays whom, and how does that transaction work, stuff, that's all governed by this treaty, um, and it hadn't been updated since 1988, but which was like pre-internet, right? And
Wow,
so
yeah.
there was this idea that, oh well, these guys they're like, we're going to update this treaty and it's going to include the internet, right? And there were people saying like, no, it's not going to include the internet, and yes, it is. And so but anyway, there was this meeting that was going to happen in December 2012 called the WICIT, the World Conference on International Telecommunication, WCIT. And so, it was not very transparent what was going on with that. There were no documents available. You could see like what was the treaty text going to look like, and so on. And so, my collaborator Jerry Brito came into my office one day at work, and he was like, "Eli, we should start a leaks site to like leak, like where people can leak the documents from that meeting, right? And so we can call it Wicket Leaks." So we made a site. So that was like a Tuesday, and
Okay.
like within 24 hours we bought the domain wicketleaks.org. We like set up a website. We like put like a place where like people could upload the documents to us, and like we launched it. We announced it on Twitter, on a blog and stuff. Within an hour we had our first leak. And like, so we just like kept leaking like over and over again, just like unapologetic. Like we had our names on the site, like it was very transparent who we were, but we were just like, we're leaking these documents. And then like it was really funny because like the State Department was like having like domestic outreach as they prepared for this meeting and stuff. And so like we got invited to like go to this, like talk to the people at the State Department about what was going on. And they said, well, we're putting together an advisory committee to help us do this. And so I was like, okay, I'll join the advisory committee. And so I joined the advisory committee, and then they were like, well, we're putting a delegation together to go to Dubai and like actually like negotiate this treaty. And I was like, well, I'll do that too. And so they let me go. I think a little bit reluctantly. They let me go, but at that point, like I had official credentials to the ITU, and like I had direct access to the documents, which I just scarfed down and immediately leaked to the internet. And this in the story, I mean, the way it played out was that there was a serious effort by a bunch of authoritarian governments to come in and say, we think that the ITU should have control over all core internet resources, all the naming and numbering and a lot of the rules, and we need to set up a regime for charging for international bandwidth, right, or international connections. And so that would have done is it would have made like a national internets where every time you connect to another country, like you're going through a narrow funnel, right, and that makes it very easy to have like a national firewall, right? And so I mean, it was absolutely an effort to censor the internet and make it easier for authoritarian regimes to censor the internet. And so that's exactly the scenario that like people were warning about. That's exactly what played out. We brought so much attention to it, and ultimately that scrutiny, I think what it led to was the treaty didn't get the treaty was ultimately like 55 countries refused to sign the treaty, including the U.S. and Europe and like sort of all the world's liberal democracies. And so today that treaty just doesn't matter. Right? Is only like I think like a handful of countries eventually ratified it, but it just doesn't govern relations between most of the world's internet connections. And so that we did get like the worst provisions out of it. So it was actually, some people were calling it like a master class in diplomatic strategy, because we got all the worst things out of it, and then in the end we said we weren't going to sign it anyway. So it worked out really well. But I think a lot of that, like it could have gone a lot worse had we not like brought attention to what was going on in that meeting.
I
So
mean,
I think
that's
like that was
huge.
like a clear example.
Just, yeah,
It was
from
like a clear
freedom and
example of like,
democracy and,
mm-hmm.
the internet, as much as it's caused a lot of problems in a lot of ways, it's also an equalizer in a lot of other ways. So, appreciate you protecting it.
no. So yeah, that was a real success, and I think like sort of like later in my Mercatus career, I wrote a paper called "Make America Boom Again," which was on supersonics, and it got like circulated within DOT, and sort of like there was actually like serious policy attention to supersonics, and actually, that ended up landing a job because of that paper at a supersonic startup called Boom, and working with like those same people like within DOT who are kind of very interested in sort of making supersonics happen again. I think in large part because the paper was making the case for why we should bring it back.
Yeah, I mean, that's profound, especially if that ends up being mainstream at any point. And, do you see, or what's the timeline that you think for, supersonic travel becoming mainstream again? Not even again,
I
really.
mean, I think it. I want it to happen, obviously as soon as possible. So if you look at the companies that are in the market, they're all talking about like the very late 2020s, which maybe you should read as like early 2030s,
Yeah.
because delays always happen in aerospace programs, like always, always, always. But yeah, so like 10 years from now, I think like if things go right, like you'll be able to buy a ticket on a supersonic airliner, and that'll be awesome.
Yeah. Well, I'm certainly crossing my fingers on that. And um, so you spent, I think, a little over 2 years in that sector.
Yeah, yeah. Mostly I worked on, believe it or not, landing and takeoff noise rules. So this is actually like the hardest thing about supersonics is like planes have gotten quieter. Like subsonic planes have gotten a lot quieter over the last 30 years. Um, and so like the bar has gone up, right? Like in terms of like what's acceptable for making noise around airports. And Concorde was incredibly loud, like just massively loud on landing and takeoff. Like not even the sonic boom, just the jet noise, right? So you can think about all the improvements that have happened in supersonics over the last 50 years since Concorde's first flight was 1969. So all the improvements that have happened there since, like in terms of engine efficiency, in terms of like materials that we have that are better, in terms of like design tools that are better, like literally Concorde was designed with like on drafting paper, right, with and wind tunnel tests and no computational fluid dynamics at all, right. So we have all these tools now. We should be able to make a lot better plane, but in some ways, like a lot of the tech gains that we've had in the industry, they're all going towards just lower noise and not other aspects of performance, which is unfortunate. And so that's what took up most of my time there is working on FAA and international like the KO standards for landing and takeoff noise.
Interesting. It's sometimes you don't think of the particulars of the hurdles that might be in the way of this technology, but that one makes sense.
Yeah, it was funny. Like when I was at Mercatus, we published a short paper just like showing. A lot of times people talk about NIMBYism in sort of like the housing world about like we people don't want apartment buildings in their neighborhood and
Right.
so on.
Not in my
But
backyard yet.
the airport noise, the airport noise NIMBYism is unbelievable, right? Like so we gathered data on this, and if you look at pretty much all of the airports around the country where like there's noise complaints, there's just a tiny minority of people making the complaints. And so we looked at like at DCA, I think we found something that was like 3/4 of the complaints from flights originating into or out of DCA were from one household,
Oh my gosh.
like one household in like Northwest DC, and there's like thousands of complaints a year from this one household, and it just like it was really really shocking to see how concentrated the complaints were, and yet those people who are complaining, like they do influence policy, right? They do like because there's if there's like one crazy person at near every airport, then every airport sees that it has a problem, and then as an industry, it just pushes everybody towards like quieter instead of like other aspects of performance, and so it really does make a difference. But it, we did that study, and it was like quite shocking to me
Wow.
anyway.
Well, I know from that sector, is when you joined the Center for Growth and Opportunity at Utah State. What led you to that opportunity, becoming a senior research fellow there, and then if you can also just kind of explain the CGO for our audience.
The CGO is a research center at Utah State University, located in the Huntsman School of Business, and we focus on real practical policy solutions in a few key pillars. The pillars are like tech and innovation, environmental stewardship, and immigration. And so like I joined. Well, our executive director is an old friend of mine, an old Mercatus colleague of mine, Chris Koopman, and we were in offices next to each other at Mercatus, and we were always kind of thinking about like what would be the best way to do things, and now we get a chance to do it. So we're uh, a smallish but like really scrappy and productive group of people. So it's a great team.
It's cool to hear that connection aspect. I don't think I knew that you guys work next to each other, and now this is kind of
Yeah.
your chance to do it your way.
Yeah. Like we were we'd go out to lunch and kind of argue, or not argue because we saw eye to eye, but think about like what's the right way. We'd look at all the other organizations around and say, oh well, they're doing it wrong, and like we can do it right.
And as a senior research fellow, what is your sort of general role?
Well, so I've carved out kind of a niche for myself, on getting economic growth going again. So I think I cut across a couple of the pillars that we do at CGO. So like tech and innovation is part of that, and then also in the environmental stewardship on like the energy side. Um, I do a fair bit on that, but really, I think of it from the perspective of uh, total factor productivity, right? So this is like an economic statistic that's just basically how much output are you getting for a given amount of inputs in the economy as a whole. And so like this is what has slowed down since the mid 1970s, and I'm just trying to get it to go a lot faster. So I focus, my sort of interest, or my method, if you will, is to like think about industrial progress, and to think about like, well, why is energy stagnating, or why is transportation stagnating, or housing, or health, or all these different sectors, and like that's kind of my method, is think about each of those sectors specifically, like get very much into the specifics and in the weeds, and talk to entrepreneurs and try to figure out like what is actually holding the sector back, and then trying to propose like policy solutions that that would make it like solve their problem, remove the obstacle, and enable them to go faster.
So when you propose these policy solutions, where do they go? What is the effort behind them to make them a reality?
Yeah, so I mean, first place they go is online, right, on our website. But yeah, we also talk to policymakers directly. We have a lot, pretty good. I personally like have a pretty good network, and so I'm always talking behind the scenes to all kinds of people, journalists or policymakers, or other like key people who can like help promote the idea. Um, and yeah, so it probably depends a little bit on the issue, but you just sort of try to either create a drumbeat behind it, or you try to get something done behind the scenes, slipped into a bill somewhere. Um, but yeah, there's just like a, I would say like not one like toolkit there, but like a family of different possibilities, depending on whether you want it to be like kind of a quiet thing, or
Right.
like a ladder thing.
Kind of working in these things where you can on the policy side.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's right.
And I know you've done some really interesting recent work on geothermal energy. Would love to learn more about that, and also if you could just kind of give some basics for those of us that aren't familiar.
Yeah, so I think geothermal energy is a technology that's incredibly promising. Um, I started getting interested in it when I started looking at just how much of it there is, right? So if you think about how much oil and gas there is on the planet, right? There's some amount, and if you think about how much fissionable material there is on the planet, like how much energy you could get out of all the uranium, like in the Earth's crust and in the Earth's oceans. Actually, oceans have the most uranium, believe it or not. Um, but you kind of do that analysis. It's like geothermal has like 40 times more than all of those that I mentioned combined, like all the fossil fuels, all the uranium. So it's like just there's an astonishing amount of heat just in the Earth's crust, and there's like 1,000 times more than that in the mantle. Like if you count like the rest of the Earth, the mantle and the core, maybe even more in the core. Um, and so really what you have to do with geothermal is just drill deep enough to get to the heat, right? So in the past to date we have done geothermal in places where it's very evident that there's like steam, right? There's hot water. There's like either like there's a fumarole and there's like steam coming out of the ground, or there's like a volcano. It's very obvious it's like hot there, or like there's a place in Italy which has Lardorello that has the oldest geothermal plant, and it's like I think it's called the Valley of the Devil, where there's like literally boiling water, like coming out of the ground. And so it's like okay, yeah, it's obvious there that there's heat and you can access it, but that's a very limited number of places around the planet. And if you could drill deeply enough, cheaply enough, you could access that heat basically anywhere. And so I think it's just an enormously valuable resource, and one that we should learn to fully exploit. So how do you get started doing that? Well, I this is going to I think that this entails a lot of like learning by doing, and you can kind of look at the shale industry as a sort of like a comparable thing. And so the shale industry like kind of started because there were some ideas around or the early 2000s of like, well, we can probably do things like fracking and so on, and we can get to a lot more oil and gas than we thought we could do it before. And there was a bill passed in 2005 called the Energy Policy Act that that made it easier to drill for oil and gas on federal lands. And so kind of without that provision, you'd have to go through a long permitting process to get access to drilling on federal lands. And so they got rid of that long permitting process through what's called the categorical exclusion, and they made it easy to drill on federal land, basically, for oil and gas. And so the oil and gas industry, what did they do? They started doing it. They did learning by doing. The flywheel started going. Like they drove down costs. And so today, the U.S. is unbelievably, it's energy independent, right? Which we are nowhere near in 2005 when this passed, and we're a net energy exporter now, and it's all because of like those incremental gains, like building and building on each other in oil and gas. And so we need the same thing to happen in geothermal. And whereas with oil and gas, it's very easy to do oil and gas development on private lands in a lot of places, like in Texas and so on. Um, the prime real estate for geothermal overlaps like 70% with federal lands. So like you really need to be able to have access to a lot of federal land to be able to do this. But with geothermal, they didn't get that provision that was made in 2005 for oil and gas. So they need something like that now. So right now it would take you about 2 years to get a permit to drill a geothermal well, even if it's the exact same drilling equipment and so on that you would do for the oil and gas well. So same equipment, same crew running the drilling rig and so on. It's 2 weeks to get approved to drill an oil and gas well, 2 years to get approved for a geothermal well. And so like main thing I have been working on is, shouldn't we fix that? Shouldn't we make it just as easy to do a geothermal well on federal land as it is to do an oil and gas well?
Is there pressure from the oil and gas industry to keep that from happening, or is there just not momentum?
I think initially in 2000, so the lore of this is that in 2005, the original text of the bill said something like oil and gas or geothermal, right? And then the oil and gas industry was against that. They got geothermal stricken from that text, and so on. I think the position of the oil and gas industry is changing, however, because it, one of the amazing things about geothermal is it really builds off of the success of oil and gas over the last 15 years with all the improvements in drilling, with the skills in fracking and other forms of subsurface engineering, the horizontal drilling, um, all of that feeds in very nicely to geothermal. And so I think a very plausible way forward for the oil and gas industry is just to become like a new and better like geothermal industry. And I think there's, that's an idea that is starting to take root somewhat, and people are starting to recognize that geothermal is a path forward for the industry, and so it's a lot of the same people. People who have spent their careers in oil and gas are now like quitting their jobs at their oil major or whatever and starting a new scrappy geothermal company. And there's a couple dozen startups just from in the last year doing geothermal stuff, and they almost all come from ex oil and gas people. So I think the perspective is changing a little bit.
And is part of that perspective change due to sort of the mindset changing around the environment?
Yeah, I think that people, I think there's some recognition that that oil and gas, like, it's not going to happen forever, right? Like there's gonna, we're gonna, I don't think we can make the transition overnight, but it's not, 100 years from now, we're not going to be drilling for oil and gas, right? Um, and so the question is, how do we make that transition effectively and gracefully and so on? And so I think some people are looking at it from that perspective, but I'm looking at it from the perspective of like, this is actually a more abundant energy source, right? So this is actually better, right? So even if you took the climate issue like aside, which I think is a very real issue, but like even if you were to put it to one side, this there's no compromises you have to make here to really think that geothermal is like the right long term answer. It's just so much more energy. Like one statistic I like to think about is, if you wanted to become Earth to become a Kardashev Type One civilization, right, using as much energy as like the sun uh, uh, sends into Earth's atmosphere, using energy at that same rate. If we were trying to power that kind of civilization, that kind of advanced like energy use civilization, strictly with fossil fuels, we'd run out in 45 days. So you just can't do it. Whereas geothermal energy, it has thousands of times, or millions of times more resource than that. And so if you believe, if you want, as I do, to have this like super abundant energy rich society, then you've got to move off of oil and gas at some point.
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting, and um, certainly you paint what the ideal sort of transition would be, but where do you actually see geothermal going? Whether that's the next decade or the next 100 years.
I think it's going to grow quite a lot. Right now, it's something like 0.4% of U.S. electricity generation, and I, we're gonna. I think we have a bunch of candidate technologies to really boost our generation quite a lot, right? So you have solar and wind, which have fallen in cost quite a lot. But I think even so, I think like geothermal could end up being something like 30% of what we produce at a much higher base than what we produce. So like within I don't know when it will get there. Like, but I think it will be clear that it's growing fast. Within 10 years from now, I think it will be like, it'll be sort of conventional wisdom that, oh, this is growing really fast. Like we're drilling a lot of wells.
Yeah,
So
it's really interesting. I'm excited to see how that evolves. Um, And in general, and your work at the CGO and the group as a whole, do you have any examples of things that have gone into public policy, that have practically affected people's lives?
Well, yeah. So I've only been there about two
Okay,
years, so I haven't had that much time to make a difference in my time there. But I would say like this is one of them, right? That what we've been talking about, the geothermal categorical exclusion, because so I mean, knock on wood, but I think this has a real chance of getting fixed.
awesome.
You know, so I'm I talk to people in the administration and so on. They're like, okay, like we hear you, like this is a good, this is probably you're probably right,
Yeah,
like this is a good idea, and no, they haven't announced anything to me or publicly yet, but I really do think like there's a good chance that this gets sorted out in the next year or two,
awesome.
that there will be a some sort of solution to a categorical exclusion for geothermal wells on federal land, and like the practical effect of that is it's going to really get the flywheel going on the learning by doing, right? Like the geothermal industry is going to have to go through the same process as the shale industry went through, right? And just by doing it more and more, that's what's going to drive down the costs and eventually lead to like very cheap source of clean baseload energy.
Exciting to think about, and certainly uh, give some optimism for the future of energy.
Yeah, I think so. I think one of the advantages of climate change is it's really a forcing function to rethink energy, and so you see a lot of people doing that, and if half of what people are working on pans out, that's going to be an amazing
Yeah.
world.
This is kind of a big question, so, up to you in terms of how you answer it, but what would you say is your sort of general philosophy around economics for long-term sustainability of our free society?
Well, I think freedom is important, obviously, and like a stable liberal democratic political order is the best way of safeguarding that. And the biggest challenge to that I see is that peaceful political systems are stable only when they are positive sum in a sort of dynamic ongoing sense, which means we need consistent economic growth, right? If we want to like keep our freedoms in the long run. So you can think of it as like, if like a big chunk of people aren't seeing their life get better year after year, and they're going to sort of like defect. They're going to like withhold support from the political system. They're going to be destabilizing, and like our system relies on the ongoing support from most people of the system. So so really like I see broad based growth, right? Sort of economic growth. Um, over the long run, is being essential for keeping human liberty, right? Or if we don't have it, I think like really like the political system is actually pretty fragile and could collapse. So so that raises the question of how you get broad based growth, right? And I think like both the evidence of theory and of history is that whatever your exact system, like unfettered markets need to play a big role in the economy, if you want to grow fast. And so, markets don't do everything. I think there is some scope for disagreement about where you want governments to intervene and how effectively they can do that and so on. But markets are very powerful and they're going to be at the center of any system that's focused on generating growth and political stability and protection of human liberties over the long term.
Really appreciate that answer and that perspective. And um, this is a little random aside that I had in my notes, but you've mentioned to me previously that English wasn't your first language. I know you mentioned being born in Brazil. Was it Portuguese?
Yeah, it's Portuguese. So, yeah, I mean, so I it's a little cheating to say English wasn't my first language because I mean, I had an American mother, right, who spoke fluent English, and my dad spoke pretty good English. So and they would kind of like say stuff to me, but yeah, absolutely. So like when I was 2 years old, spoke Portuguese extremely fluently, and went to visit relatives in California, and like for Christmas or something like that, and they were all commenting on my English accent, and like when I spoke English, I had spoke with a very strong accent, and like couldn't get the grammar right and stuff like that. And they were like, well, he's never going to speak English fluently. And is kind of amusing to me
I mean,
in
it
hindsight.
really is. You certainly, I don't think it would strike most people that it's not your first language. So, well, I appreciate you sharing that as well. And, um, my next question, I feel like you answered some. It's really a story of when you saw how deeply your work could affect change. And for me, just in what you've said so far in that internet policy that you talked about, that was tremendous. And, I think in your current energy work, while it might be a long-term endeavor, that's certainly the case. Any other areas that you're interested in highlighting for us?
Where my work sort of made some change. I'd say
Or when you realized,
the
like the
supersonic
first time
stuff,
that you
like
felt like, yeah,
yeah,
wow, this hard work I put into this like actually did a lot.
yeah. So I think with the WikiLeaks thing was definitely one example. I think another one was with supersonics. Basically, what we wanted at Boom and what I wanted at Mercatus and at Boom was to have a standard that that we could certify to that would in terms of landing and takeoff noise for supersonics, because the FAA previously had a policy of we are going to apply basically the subsonic landing and takeoff noise standards to supersonics, because those planes that are flying subsonically when they're taking off and landing at an airport, so it doesn't make sense to have a separate policy. And so I basically it was sort of like grasping in the dark, like how to fix this, but eventually it sort of like hit on a solution, and basically I raised with the FAA, like, hey, we're going to certify our airplane, and there is no standard that applies to us. So I looked up in the regulatory code of like it said, the takeoff and landing noise standards, they apply to Concorde and they apply to subsonic airplanes, but they don't apply to anything else. And I kind of like showed that to them, and they came out and they ended up having to do a new legal interpretation of like where they stood, and they came out with sort of a memo that said one thing that they could do is a rule of particular applicability. So if you are a manufacturer who wants to develop a new supersonic airplane, you can go to FAA and say no standard applies to me, but please make one just for my plane based on my plane data, right? Like based on like what the actual performance is of my aircraft and engine and so on. And so that was, from a domestic policy standpoint, that was a perfectly adequate solution for Boom and for any other player in the industry now that wants to come forward and sort of do that. And so yeah, so like was uh, kind of astonished when it happened, but it was a
Yeah.
big deal. I think it doesn't solve. Unfortunately, aviation is an international industry, and so you kind of have to get every other country to sign off on whatever you're doing, and so the international takeoff and landing noise discussion is much more contentious. But at least on the FAA side, I think basically any credible airframer doesn't have to worry about what exactly the certification standard is, as long as no standard currently exists, and FAA is willing to work with them on a standard going
I
forward.
mean, that's really important to support long-term innovation in this space. So I'm glad to hear that's happening here. Hopefully that
Yeah,
can spread elsewhere as well.
yeah. I think if I look back over my career, there's not a lot of those moments, right? Like it's like I think of it like you only get it probably a handful of moments like that where you actually made a difference over your whole career. But like hopefully when they come, like they're generating like billions of dollars in social
Yeah.
value, right? And so like your efforts are like absolutely worth it, because uh, like I said, like billions of dollars are going to result from that. And so yeah, that's that to me. Like if you only had one of
Yeah.
those moments, right, and it's generating billions of dollars, it's like, well, you paid your
Yeah.
weight.
That's really cool. And I'm excited to watch, where that all leads over the long term.
Yeah, me too.
Do you recall an experience from your childhood that, showed you the importance of giving back in general?
Um, I'm not sure about exactly giving back, but I think I mentioned like earlier, like the sort of like the expat community and like sort of like the warmness of that community, and I think like that's really valuable. And so it's something I've tried to hold on to is that like to be kind of open and play nice with new people and have that sort of like warmness to outsiders and so on. So that's like I think that's yeah, it's probably uh, the thing that's like stuck with me most from childhood in that regard.
And I'm sure that you've had a variety of mentors over the years. Is there anyone in particular that you'd want to highlight as an especially impactful mentor?
Yeah. So Tyler Cowan was my dissertation advisor and has given me invaluable advice at key junctures in my career. And I also think I have a pretty good model of like what would Tyler say in my head that I consult pretty often. But Tyler just he asks these like super incisive questions that like often put you on the back foot and make you see things in a new way. So I saw him just about a month ago, and he clubbed me over the head with a challenging career question, and we discussed it for maybe 15 minutes. But like, I'm still thinking about it, like
Yeah.
even a month later. So so he's been great, and I wouldn't be where I am without his efforts and guidance.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I've had the pleasure of hearing him speak, and definitely a fascinating human that I'm sure you've learned a ton from over the years.
Yeah, I mean, it is real. I can't stress like how disorienting it can be, like to have him just like ask you just like the like incredibly incisive question, and you're just like kind of on the spot. And you're like, oh, I have to think of an answer to this. It's like super hard.
If you'd like, you can ask me a question.
Sure, yeah. So you've done a lot in real estate, right? So I have a lot of friends who are working on like new cities as like a kind of like real estate development play, with the idea that you could have a like a new city clear out a lot of the dead institutional wood of existing cities, and that would make them more dynamic or dense or walkable, whatever your goal is. Um, so like some of these are like alone in the city, alone in the desert, like kind of how Las Vegas happened, or others are like edge cities, like near existing cities. So like, what do you? I'm just curious, like, what you think about that from like a real estate development perspective, like the idea of a new city, like could it be successful? Like, what would you have to do?
I mean, I think it's really interesting. I've read about a few of these. One in particular in Honduras, I've learned quite a bit about. And um, from a real estate perspective, I think it's going to take some buy-in from the people that are originally believing in the concept to get the real estate market going. Because as someone that that's generally just like a real estate investor, it's going to be hard to get me to risk my money in an unproven market. But so I think it's going to take buy-in from people with some serious capital in terms of getting it started. But it's promising, and like I could personally be talked into being one of those founding sort of real estate people in a place like that, because it's something I really believe in. Like, I think that so many of our systems, as you know, are a mess, and how incredible it would be to sort of start with a relatively clean slate. Obviously, the sort of variety of clean slates you can have varies by where your city's going to be, whether it's incorporated or not into another
Sure.
jurisdiction. And but I've sort of always had a very out there dream that I don't expect to accomplish, of creating a micronation where the laws make sense to me. But if this is as close, being involved in one of these cities is as close as I could get to that, I would certainly be interested. And if you make one of the most desirable places to live, can't imagine the real estate not doing well.
Yeah, I mean, like the place premium is all just like a function of governance, right? Like if you govern a city well, then people are going to want to move there. If you govern it poorly, people are going to exit.
And I think you combine that with the locale and the desirability of that as well, and how livable is just the environment in general. I mean, especially as our environment changes over the coming years, that should be an interesting factor.
And there's a lot of projects out there, so
I appreciate that question. Yeah, no, it's super interesting. Definitely something I'm keeping an eye on, but also would take my time pretty heavily before digging in.
yeah, absolutely.
So, if everything were to end tomorrow, what would you be most proud of?
Like my life ending tomorrow.
Either your life or the
Like okay, so
universe,
um,
it's all
yeah, sure,
gone.
the universe. Yeah. Um, yeah, probably. I mean, probably not actually like the professional stuff that we've been talking about. Probably, like I'm proud of my family. My wife and kids. I'm proud of like personal growth that I've had over my life. Right. Like mostly, I'd probably try not to be proud. Right. Try not to have much of an ego at all. I think existence is kind of like an amazing thing. Like just like having a life at all is an amazing thing, and I think I just want to experience it the way it is rather than like tell a
Yeah.
story about who I am and how great my achievements are. It's just kind of just take it as it comes, and um, it's pretty amazing that we're here talking to each other through the internet and thousands of miles away, and I don't know if you kind of just take
Yeah,
it
no,
from
it's
from
a
that
beautiful
perspective.
perspective,
Life
one
never
that
gets old.
I wish more people could take on, especially in this kind of divisive day and age.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, definitely. If you think about it in terms of like the culture war or like all the sort of like the hate that's spewed online and stuff, it's
Yeah,
very
and
different.
sort of my last big question is the one I've been asking every guest, and it's relevant to what we were just talking about. Potentially, if you could snap your fingers and fix one thing in the world, what would it be, and how do you think that change would reverberate?
Yeah, so I guess I would want people to agree with me. I guess that industrial progress is like should be one of the top political priorities, right? Like that is what drives living standards. So if we had politicians competing to brag about like increasing productivity instead of like creating jobs, right? Which is like what they brag about now. It's like, oh, I created this many jobs. Well, tell me instead about like like how much productivity you created in the economy, right? And if that's what everybody cared about, I think the political system like would respond to that, and we'd all be
Yeah,
a lot richer. So and a lot a lot more exciting things would happen, and not just richer, because I think like I have a sense that like if we get more progress in our lifetime, it's kind of like we get to see more of history, right? Like we get to see like more change, and like that's exciting to me, right? Just I want to see like
yeah.
more stuff happen.
Yeah, that would certainly be a valuable mindset. And I think, along with that industrial progress comes just like, for me, the general concept of mutual benefit. And there's just a lot of society that is like, I want to win. And I just, we can all do a lot better if we're winning together.
Yeah, totally. I mean, like it's very hard actually to like
Right.
literally win by yourself, right? In sort of like a positive, like there's no way like you can get all the stuff and hoard all the stuff. um if no one wants to trade with you, you're dead. So it really is, we are all kind of in the same boat here, to a considerable degree, and like let's just all choose to be a lot richer than we are today.
Well, thank you for your service to humanity, whether it's protecting the internet or, improving the speed at which we can travel amongst many other things, our energy situation. It's really is inspiring. And I'm sure listeners are wondering, how can they best support you and your impact?
CGO is a 501c3 nonprofit, so like send money. Our website is thecgo.org. But aside from that, you can follow along with me on Twitter, where my handle is just my name, Eli Dourado. And I would say just in general, in your job, in your discourse, demand better, right? Like progress happens when we're all hungry for it. So I think if we all agree like excellence is the standard, then a lot of good things will
I
happen.
love that. I think it's definitely something to follow, demand better. And I'm certain that people will be keeping an eye on you and all the really cool efforts that you're undergoing. And I'm excited to keep track and to stay in touch and continue our conversation.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it. Yeah.
Thanks for listening to this episode of People Are the Answer. To find out more, go to peoplearetheanswer.com.